The Carolina Hurricanes held their exit interviews on Friday to reflect on the 2024-25 season, along with the playoffs. While the journey's end was a little bit disappointing, there was still a lot of great positives to take away from it. And moreover, the future looks really bright in Raleigh.
Your Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everydayer for making this your first listen of the day. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hawkers, also the co-host of the Searchcast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all of my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. On the Monday edition of the pod, we're going to go over some of the things that the players said from their exit interviews. It was just a player one on Friday as we're waiting for Tulsky and Brindamore to do theirs on Tuesday. Not all the guys were present, but some of the big names that we consider of the now and the future, and some others as well over there, talking about how they were disappointed in the series against the Florida Panthers in the conference final, but overall still very proud of this team for getting as far as they did. Also going to talk about how, with the young core that they have and just a lot of guys under contract, the future looks really bright for the Hurricanes overall. And then towards the end of the show, we're going to dive a lot more into specifics later on this offseason, since we're still a good few weeks away from the draft and even free agency on July 1st, which is less than a month from now. So as we get closer, we're going to do more in-depth stuff, but this is kind of like what's an early look for the Hurricanes in terms of, the NHL draft that's going to be held in Los Angeles on the 27th and 28th of June. And then look kind of a broad overview of what the Hurricanes need to do for free agency. But before we jump into all of that for today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 wins. Now, for the Carolina Hurricanes, one of the things for me was one of the big takeaways, and I did a written article about this over at the Hawker, so I'll make sure to link it in the description if you haven't read it yet, just to give my, written overall thoughts from this. But this is more of like a thinking of it out loud type of deal. But looking at the Hurricanes and kind of getting the vibe the guys are going for from exit interviews, one of the big ones was how the Eastern Conference Finals went overall for them against the Florida Panthers. Going down 3-0, getting outscored 16-4 in the first three games wasn't the greatest. Did force a game 5 after their win in game 4, and then ultimately saw a 2-0 lead kind of go diminished and got eliminated in 5 games. But outside of that, they were proud of this team for what they accomplished to get there. So starting off with Jacob Slavin and Jordan Martin. Overall, Slavin was talking about, I wish we gave ourselves a chance from the beginning, but I don't think we did with the way we played in the first 3 games. It's something I think we'll look back on as a group and wish it was different. And which is true. I mean, you go into the conference final, you won both of your series with 4-1. You're feeling pretty good about yourselves. You feel like, okay, this team is, was able to dispatch a New Jersey Devils team that, had some guys out, but it's still, a team you still can't take lightly. Go play the Washington Capitals. They're the team who, had the best record in the Eastern Conference. We're in the fight for the President's Trophy. So, and they're a physical team. So you kind of think, okay, this could be a very long 6-7 game series. Hurricanes took care of them in 5. But then you face the Florida Panthers again, and you know how it was 2 seasons ago. But there were some changes in terms of the roster on both sides. But going down early 3-0 in the series didn't really help. And I could see where a lot of the guys were just, if they were able to give themselves a better opportunity in the first couple of games, maybe they would have won one. If they split early on at home, or won game 3, because they, it was 1-1 going into the third period. If they played that third period a little bit better, maybe the series is a little bit different, going into game 4. Maybe if Carolina takes care of business in Florida, split there, or split back in Raleigh for this first couple games. Maybe Game 5 wouldn't be such a do or die situation with their second elimination game of the series. Now, all that being said, there was a lot of good things to take away from. There are some positives, and this is what Jordan Martinook said after the team saw Jay Gensel go to Tampa Bay, Brett Pesce going to New Jersey along with Stefan Nason, Bray Shea going to Nashville, Taylor Terravine going back to Chicago. Martinook said, I feel like it was just such a great group of guys that really just gelled together. Maybe we weren't supposed to be as good as we ended up being, but I think it just shows how much work went into it and how much people really cared about this team. And he's very right about that. And you look at it, and this team, I know a lot of people, there's some discourse of like, oh, these guys were favored, earlier in the season. All it's like no one's really saying they were going to miss or be wild card. But if you look at national media on some outlets, there were talking about, the Hurricanes maybe becoming wild card teams. Some even hot takes that the Hurricanes were going to miss the playoffs entirely. And, and if you ask Hurricanes fans and just the overall scope of it, a lot of people said this was going to be a step back here for the Carolina Hurricanes. Because you look at all the guys they lost to free agency, and you got some guys, you got Sean Walker, you got Shane Gostisbehere, you got some of those guys back to kind of replace your whole, second D pair that basically left. So your third D pair became your new second. You got a whole new third pair with Ghost and Walker. Then you add, some guys into the forward core. You got Jack Roslovic, Eric Robinson, get Willem Carrier, stuff like that. So you do get some additions. Not the additions you would, you would be like, okay, this team it's going to be fine. They were full they fixed the holes that they needed. They should be full steam ahead. No, there was a little bit of like, how's this team going to be with like a little bit of not a lesser roster, but probably a roster that people weren't recognizing as strong as seasons past, but still a team they were kind of like, okay, we'll see what they can do. If it's wild card, that's fine. Missing the playoffs, I don't think they were going to do that. But you look at the season overall, they go and fight till the end. They get the second Metro spot, had a chance to go fight for the second seed in the East, but of course trying to rest guys the last week and a half of the season. You already clinched, didn't want anyone getting hurt because they didn't want to lose anyone going to the playoffs, which is smart, all things considered, and it's just one of those things you got to do to preserve your team. And then you go to the first round, there were discussions like, okay, they could do it, but they got to see what New Jersey can do because of the Hurricanes power play situation. How is that going to be? And all of that, and them winning on the road. Well, they took care of business in round one. Then round two was, okay, well, they're playing the Capitals. The Capitals were one of the best team in the East. Can Carolina even match up to it? Beat them in 5 games, and then it's like, okay, what's the East? Like, no one thought the Hurricanes are going to make the Eastern Conference Final. And then you look at the fact that they get there, it doesn't go as planned. A lot, earlier exit than a lot of people thought. The way they got outscored early on didn't help either. But overall, when you look at a team like this, where exceeding expectations in the highest regard of a retool step back season, that's still pretty good for the Carolina Hurricanes. And overall, that kind of sets you up for, it gives you the indication that, okay, this is a good foundation to have with where the new trajectory of this team is, because Eric Tulsky's the new GM and stuff like that. Darren York is the assistant general manager. So, there's the philosophy is still there of like with Don Waddell being at the helm as GM before, but now you're seeing a new possible direction. And the fact that the Hurricanes were able to exceed the expectations on a roster that wasn't maybe as strongest as we've seen before, and it's given them that potential to take that next step with whoever they bring in the offseason coming up this summer. So I think, yeah, it's disappointing how the season ended, but there's still a lot of positives to take away from a group that went from possible wildcard team to maybe getting knocked out early to a team who made an Eastern Conference Final, did win the Eastern Conference Final game, and basically has a lot of the roster locked up with now a bunch of draft picks going into the summer and, almost $29 million in cap. So there's still a lot of good things to come from just this season of exceeding expectations and now looking at the future ahead of what is possibly next for the Hurricanes. So stick around. We'll talk more about the bright future ahead for the Canes here in a second on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highly worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and single-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. New to FanDuel? It's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment worth. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Now, like I said at the end of segment 1, there was disappointment of how the season ended, but they were still proud of the exceeding expectations on the Carolina Hurricanes had, where some didn't think they were going to get as far as they did. That being said, though, the future is also bright with the Hurricanes as you look at just the roster overall with the guys that are coming back, the young core that they have as well. There's still a lot to be excited about. And, the captain, Jordan Staal, even mentioned it too, that, amongst the frustration of how the season ended, there's still a lot of positives to come from this year and in the future. He said, it's been a little frustrating right now just trying to unpack what happened in the last month or so and all season long. You want to be in these situations. You want to be in the playoffs. You want to have a chance at all the things. It's just not easy to win. We love for it to be easy, but there's opportunity to always get better. I think the group we have and how it played out this year, we have a great opportunity to take that next step. But yeah, it was a positive year, and it didn't end the way we want to, but a lot of good stuff. And that kind of goes back into the sentiments of that first part with Slavin and Martinook and how you see that, the end didn't go as planned. You want to put yourself in a situation where you win more than just one Eastern Conference final game. You didn't want to get outscored the way you did, and you wanted to have a little bit better of a overall standing of the Eastern Conference final and how you just played that series and all that. But just for the fact, too, it's like the thing that, like he said, is take that next step. And that's where it's kind of like the main caveat of, it didn't go as planned, but this was a good foundation for this new core, or, I won't say new core, but a core that is adding a lot of pieces that's going to make this team good for the now and in the future as well, because there's a lot of guys who are still in their mid to early 20s on this team who are young, who are good, who are only going to get better. I mean, because you look at Sebastian Aho, he's 27. Andrei Svechnikov's 25. You look at Seth Jarvis, 23. Stankoven, 22. Jackson Blake, 21. You got Bradley Nadeau coming in the wings. He's only 20. So and Scott Morrow is 22. So 21, 22. So you're still looking at a team with guys who are the main core now, who are mid to early 20s, and a couple guys in their older 20s, like Aho and Slavin and all of them. But then you've got a lot of the other guys who are 23 or below, like I said, Jarvis, Blake, Nadeau, Stankoven, all of them. There's still a bright future to look at in terms of this team, and I think that's what's making it really exciting for this group. And even Sebastian Aho kind of shared that same sentiments in Turkey, was just looking at these young guys and, just the core in general. There's a lot to be excited for. We have young guys like Stinks and Nikishin. We already know what kind of player Jarvie is. He's only going to get better. Blakey, talk about Jackson Blake. We've got good pieces on the team, and obviously the core, or whatever you want to call it, want all of it. We've been through quite a bit. It's an exciting offseason. We do have the cap space, and we do have some assets. I guess time will tell how it's all going to play out. And and like I said, you're talking about Alexander Nikishin, who did pretty okay in the playoffs so far in the first 3 games of his career in the NHL. But Yeah, Alexander Nikishin, only 23. That's talking about, Stankoven, Blake, Jarvis, a lot of these guys. And then the one thing I really like, too, is the fact that Aho mentioned it. You got the cap space. So the Hurricanes are playing just north of $28 million in cap. There's not a lot of guys that you need to bring back in terms of the main roster. Of course, you got Brent Burns possibly leaving, Dmitry Orlov possibly leaving, Roslovic, Robinson, Jost, Stillman. There's a lot of guys on the roster that are probably going to be on the way out. And, you do have a lot of guys that are in the system that probably could come up. Do you look at Scott Morrow for another year? Or you give him a year with the Hurricanes, or do you go back to the AHL? And if that's the case, if he plays in Chicago, then now you have a defensive spot you need to take care of on the main roster. Or if you look at, is there some possible trades with maybe the current roster to use them and possible draft capital to go big name hunting? That's a possibility too. But the one thing that Aho did say is the fact that you got a lot of cap space, and there's some roster needs that need to happen. Of course, we'll talk about that a little bit later on in segment 3. But you could really go into this offseason with a lot of draft capital to go and trade those away. You don't have to have all the draft picks. You don't have to use all your draft picks. You can use those as packages to go get other guys from other teams that have term already. And then on top of that, you have the cap space to go and get the big names. Mitch Marner, Brock Besser, Nikolai Ehlers. I know Sam Bennett's going to be available. Aaron Ekblad. There's a lot of guys who are coming up from free agency that the Hurricanes can go after. And I said it earlier, the last couple of months of this could be after the trade deadline, this offseason could be a reload year or a loading up year for the Hurricanes, to where like I said, when you get over $28 million in cap, that's going to give you a lot of good space to get something like that done. So the fact that Aho said, the offseason looks bright. You got a lot of draft, you got the cap, you got the draft capital assets that you could, trade away. Now let's see what happens. And I think it's kind of where Aho's saying, hey, front office, we have all these things. We're going in the right direction with the current roster, but we also have all these things we could use to make us better. And I think it's not really him calling out the front office, but put the office on, hey, we know what we're looking at. We know where we're at as a team. Let's take it to the next level. So I think that's just kind of saying, hey, we are so bought in. Help us go to that next level and get us players. I mean, they already got guys, but that the guys who can help take them to the next step and, go win more than one conference final game, go and maybe make the Stanley Cup final for the first time since 2006. But I think for me, that's kind of a big takeaway in the fact that while the season wasn't the ending they wanted, even if it was one where the expectations went a lot farther than they thought, it's still a season where, okay, you set yourself up for a step for the next year. And now you look at the offseason and all the stuff they have. Now you can take that next step. And I think with the fact that you look at Aho and all those guys saying, hey, there's some positive takeaway from the season, but the future also looks bright as well with all the stuff we have going for us in terms of the current roster and what we could use this offseason to get better. And there's a lot of reasons to get better. Because I said, the cap and draft capital could go a long way into possible trade packages, go get guys in free agency, do you possibly re-sign some guys back? Maybe there could be a case where, you could trade some guys on the main group that, maybe do have term, but maybe not be here long term. So there's a lot to go for in the offseason. It should be very interesting. Now, being said, what are the early looks into the draft for the Carolina Hurricanes in the free agency re-sign phase? Well, stick around. I'll talk about it more here in a second on a Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Now, looking at the Carolina Hurricanes and their offseason of cap space, draft picks, and stuff like that. So for the Hurricanes right now, they have 31 of 50 standard contracts taken care of. You can go up to 50, but you can't exceed it. They are sitting at $67 million of projected cap, with the floor being at 70. However, their current cap space, with the cap going up to $95 million, 95 and a half, they are sitting right now at $28.415 million in current cap space, with a lot of room to grow there. Also, that said, in terms of their draft picks, they do have one first-round pick, and of course it's theirs, 0 picks in the second round, just because of trading that away. But then they have a pick in round 3, and that's from the Tampa Bay Lightning. A pick in round 4, which is theirs. 0 in round 5, but they have 2 6s, which are Tampa's and theirs, and then they have their own pick in round 7. So you're looking at the fact that you got 6 picks in this draft: 1-1, 1-3, 1-4, 2 6s, and a 7. Now, if you look at next draft for 2026, 2 first rounders, a second, a third, 2 6s, and a 7th. And then if you want to look even farther, how about 2027? They at least have 1 pick in every round from 1 to 7, and they also have 2 3s that they got in the trade with the Dallas Stars. So over the next 3 drafts, there is a good number of draft capital that the Hurricanes could use. Like I said, you have $28.415 million in cap space. Now, that being said, you got Foss, who's going to be UFA, Roslovic, Robinson, Tyson Jost, Orlov, and Brent Burns. And of course, there can be some possible re-signs and all that. But if you look at the team overall, and I think this is where it's going to be an interesting aspect of, you have all that draft capital, you've got all those, you got the cap space to go there. Like I said, $28.4 million. There's a lot you could do with making sure you get guys for this upcoming offseason. Like I said, you got Mitch Marner, Besser, Ehlers, Bennett, Ekblad. The list goes on and on of guys that you can go after. Is there possible trades of the current roster that could leave to maybe swing some other guys that aren't maybe free agents, that are maybe possible UFA rights or RFA rights you can go for restricted free agents, or guys with a term on other teams that maybe if you package the right deal could bring them over, and then you don't have to worry about signing other guys, and you can still make room to build the cap around other guys that you bring in. So is there possible guys on this roster that could move? I think that with the right package, there are some possible guys who could leave. Could that be, do the Hurricanes go off away from the analytics a little bit, and maybe just William Carrier stay, even though he did sign a 6-year contract for $2 million each? Who knows? Is there the biting the bullet and maybe trying to move Kotkaniemi's 4.8? I don't know what space you can get from that. Of course, we'll talk more about that as we get closer to or towards that re-sign phase, that free agency period, where also a lot of trades could happen as well. Does he possibly go? Is there some possible upgrades of guys, like some younger guys on the roster or even the AHL that could be, hey, we're going to move you out so we can go get these other, get some big names in? Because right now the Hurricanes are absolutely stacked on their prospect pool. And with how they draft usually, the Hurricanes are pretty good at finding some gems in the draft. So there's a possibility of you could, I wouldn't say sell the farm, but you can maybe lose some assets in that farm to maybe loosen a logjam in certain spots, like the defense, possible wingers, stuff like that, to where right now there's a lot of really good prospects, but not a lot of space on the main roster. And with a lot of these contracts on the main roster that go 3-4 plus years, could those guys be okay with waiting in Chicago for a while, or maybe be the next call up for guys who get hurt and then have to go back when they return? So there's a lot of avenues the Hurricanes can go down with, of guys on the current roster, maybe moving some prospects, maybe move some draft capital to go and make some trades to bring in some other guys from other teams who aren't necessarily going to become UFAs or RFAs, but do have some term on them. You know, there's a lot of links to Marco Rossi being available from Minnesota, who's going to be that the Hurricanes could maybe go offer sheet or still trade for. There's possible rumblings of JJ Peterka might be wanting to get paid a lot of money, but maybe the Sabres are considering maybe moving him. You got Bowen Byram, who's going to be an RFA. Is there a possibility there? We're just talking guys who might be some RFA status players who still have their rights with their current teams, or maybe there's some guys on the roster, some other teams that could be available to go trade for. So there's a lot to be desired for the Hurricanes. Like I said, that's not even talking about the big UFA guys that are going to be available as well with that $28.4 million in cap. But of course, like I said, as we get closer to the draft and the re-sign phase and free agency, we'll start doing a little bit more of targeting certain guys and who I think the Hurricanes should go after, who could really fit this system. Because Seth Jarvis even said it during the exit interviews, and Aho said it too. It's about getting the right guys that fit this system. It's like, yeah, you want to go big name hunting, which is always a good thing to do, but you also want to make sure that you get the big name hunter guys that you're going to go hunt for in free agency and trades that will fit the system. And I think we kind of saw that with the whole Mikko Rantanen situation where, yes, he's a superstar player, but his skill set maybe doesn't match what the Hurricanes can do. And even with some tinkering, they really don't want to go away from their main core of what's gotten them to 7 consecutive playoff appearances, 3 Eastern Conference Finals appearances. So, yeah, you want to try to keep your system there, maybe loosen up in some areas, but you don't want to get too away from what your identity is as a team. So I think, like what Jarvis said, it's more of looking at who you can get in trades and in free agency that's going to elevate your system to make your system better. Could it be a Ekblad or a Bennett in free agency? Or do you go and get, guys like Peterka or Rossi or whoever that you can think of as some additions to this roster? Maybe even, Mitch Marner is more of a playmaker, but he's got that playmaker ability to where you had 199 points in 2 seasons. That'd be a great addition for the Hurricanes to go get a guy like that. It's just there's so many ways this team can go and make some big changes to the roster where it's not like detrimental to the team where like you're kind of changing the whole identity, but you're kind of adding to what their system is, what their identity as a team is, and being able to fit with this core of group of guys and, use your cap space, use your draft picks, maybe use current roster guys, maybe use some of your prospects you already have to go make those moves. So like I said, as we get closer, more deep dives into individual things, but overall, there's so many ways that this team could take a foundation year like this, a retool year, and build on it for next season to where you look at 25-26, and this could be a year where, a lot of teams are going to have some draft capital this offseason, so I would not be surprised if we see a lot of big contracts, big moves happening with going from $88 million to $95.5 million, and a lot of teams having this cap space. But for the Hurricanes individually, this probably could be one of their biggest off seasons of moving themselves up from a team that are contenders of guys who can make a deep run to cup favorites. And I think that's going to be the big thing for the Hurricanes is how much are you going to invest in your cap? Because we know they spend up to the cap. They do it every year. The narrative that Tom Dundon is cheap is not true. They spend up to the cap every year. And this is where you got $28.4 million. I would say do not be surprised if we see them get really close to that 95.5, depending on the free agents they bring in, guys they go trade for, and all that stuff. So it should be a very exciting and very interesting offseason and a lot to talk about over the next few weeks as we get closer to the draft on the 27th and the 28th, and of course, July 1st for the start of free agency. But those are going to be a lot of episodes at another time. Speaking of which, this is the episode of Locked On Hurricanes. Thank you for making your first episode. Check out Locked On NHL Game Night. Every game, every night until a Stanley Cup champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NHL Game Night on Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to keep up with me, I'm at OneSureZach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky at the Zachary Martin, where you can find link trees in my bios for all of my written content over at thehockeywriters.com. If you want to check out my other podcasts, well, it's the Surgecast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. If you want to check out Locked On Hurricanes, well, we're on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio. Make sure to follow, subscribe, leave a 5-star rating or review because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, well, it's Locked On Hurricanes. Subscribe, hit the bell notification so you don't miss the show. Hit the thumbs up to let me know if you like the show as well. Share it with other Caniacs to become everydayers just like you. But hope everyone enjoyed the Monday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Monday. And until next time, as always, let's go Canes.